Welcome to the Menopause and Cancer podcast, where we speak with cancer patients, survivors, and incredible experts in their fields to help us find solutions to our symptoms and ideas to improve our health. I'm your host, Danny Binnington, and in today's episode, I want to find out which herbal medication works for which of your most bothersome menopause symptoms. I'm joined by an incredible expert, Melinda McDougall. She's a registered medical herbalist. She's analysed hundreds of research papers on herbal medicine and menopause. She has extensive knowledge supporting those with a history of cancer. And we really want to also tease out from our community what they want help with. So I'm also joined by a whole group of the women in our community. We're going to cover what is the difference between herbal medicines and supplements, because I think a lot of times people are confused. What herbal medicine works for which menopause symptom. We are going to deep dive into ashwagandha and black cohosh, and we're really going to want to understand what considerations we have to make for different types of cancer. For example, if you have an estrogen positive cancer, breast cancer, or a gynecological cancer, we're going to be talking about phytoestrogens, how to find quality herbs if you want to buy them yourself. And we're also talking about how to find a professional medical herbalist. There is so much to explore in this episode, and I really hope it's going to be super helpful for you. Welcome, everyone, to our Menopause and Cancer Herbal Medicine workshop, and welcome, Melinda. How are you today?
Oh, it's great to be here, Danny, with everyone this evening. You know, always enjoy talking to you and the menopause and cancer community.
Thank you. We met in person on Friday, didn't we? It's not the first time we met in person, but we had a community walk in Battersea Park and you joined us with a lovely doggy. So it was really special. Thank you for
Yeah,
joining us.
that was such a beautiful walk. It was, if any of you watching or listening get the chance to come to any of the meetups, it's really worth doing to be with other people and share stories. It's really powerful.
Yeah. And we actually talked about living herbal medicine, didn't we, Melinda? I spoke about a plant that I really like. It's called calendula. And on your way home, you found one and sent me a photo, which was really special, I think.
Yes, it was good synchronicity, wasn't it?
I think it definitely was. Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the workshop, I can share more about getting involved in more walks and talks across the country, but we'll get on with some of the most important bits now. So, Melinda, tell me a little bit about you and what you do in your job so that everyone at home understands who we're talking to today.
Great. So my name is Melinda McDougall, and I'm a medical herbalist, and I specialize in menopause support. I have an online clinic and I support women all over the UK. So these are women, going through all different types of menopause, whether it's, premature menopause, a natural menopause. Some women might be on HRT but might need further support. And then, of course, I've got a lot of women in my clinic who have had a cancer diagnosis and have then been plunged into menopause. So I am also the former vice president of the National Institute of Medical Herbalists, which is the UK's largest registered body of medical herbalists, largest professional body. And I give lots of talks and webinars and podcasts on this subject, all the time. I love talking about herbal medicine and menopause and how the plants can help you to really make yourself feel better as you're going through this quite testing time, which, it can be quite a difficult one for lots of us.
Yeah. One reason I like to repeat our conversations almost yearly is a lot changes. And when
Mm.
you and I first met years ago, we had different evidence for certain plants and certain things. Like we're going to talk about phytoestrogens, for
Mhm.
example, today. So it's really important to stay up to date. We also know that the medical professionals are now picking their ears. So at the last was it the British Menopause Society, one of their main conferences? You were a speaker. I
Mhm.
think 4 years ago, that would have been unheard of. If we had
Mm.
said Melinda will give a talk at the British Menopause Society conference. We thought, no way. Now it's happened. So I do think it's important to stay with the time and be
Yeah.
current. Do you agree?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's really great to see. I mean, I collaborate with a lot of GPs and menopause specialists, and it's really great to feel like, people are starting to broaden their minds and to
Yeah.
understand the benefits of a holistic approach, especially for women who have had a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah. And a few workshops back, one of our lovely ladies, Jo, she said, gosh, it's like there's a party happening out there and you weren't invited. And all we want to do is really invite people to the party and talk
Yeah.
about different approaches and
Yeah.
recognizing that everyone's journey is so different.
Mm.
So I'd quite like to launch a poll for all of you at home, and it's just 3 questions. The first question is, are you confused about herbal medicine for menopause support? The second question is, how did you arrive in menopause? Melinda asked me to ask you this because it's important for you to understand who's in the room today. There are many of you here, and we'd quite like to gauge who's with us today so we can make it as relevant as possible. And my favorite question, were you aware menopause would happen as a result of your treatment? So just 3 really quick questions. Take your time, and I will close the poll a little bit later. So thank you. Whilst you do all of this at home, I'll give you a minute or two. In the meantime, Melinda, how do you define herbal medicine and how does it differ from taking supplements? Because one of the biggest confusions I had in my own head, but I also see in our community when they take to the chat group in Facebook, for example, is that supplements are very intermingled with herbal medicine. Explain to us the difference.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Danny. And, I think herbal medicine just sort of generally gets lumped under supplements. So when people talk about, what supplements can I take? Um, but actually, when you think about herbal medicine, it's actually about using whole plants to treat illness. So whole plant extracts. So when you're looking at supplements, they're often isolated constituents or isolated chemicals that you find in some of the herbal medicines that are then really concentrated. So you often get very sort of high strength. For example, one you would see quite often is isoflavones, which come from soy and red clover. And they tend to get isolated into a supplement and then concentrated. So you get these incredibly high doses. And that's not what you'd normally get in a plant, like say in a little red clover plant. And it's really important to recognize the difference because herbal medicine is something that we have used as human beings over thousands of years to support our health and well-being. And particularly women have a real affinity with herbal medicine. And, as women, we've used herbs and we've had this knowledge for thousands of years of how to heal ourselves and our communities. So that's a good definition to sort of have in your head. And also lots of supplements are also mineral supplements. So you might have things like magnesium or iron, or you might have oils like omega-3 or fish oils, and they're not strictly herbal medicines. So it's just good to know the difference when we're talking about what's herbal medicine and what's a supplement.
Yeah, I think in general, people refer to it all as one. So we in the a few weeks ago, we actually had the workshop sort of labeled as complementary therapies and herbal medicine because people throw it all in one pot, don't they? And people talk about omega-3 supplements in the same sentence as they talk about herbal medication. And so it's really important to get clear what it is that we're talking about. Before I quiz you with my next question, shall I just share the poll result with everyone?
Yeah.
Um, just to see what's going on. 82% say they're feeling confused about herbal medicine for menopause support. 40% of everyone here today arrived in menopause after cancer through chemotherapy.
Mm.
35% are on endocrine therapy, so they are probably your aromatase inhibitors or
Mhm.
tamoxifen, and 25% through surgery.
Mhm.
And 52% of people kind of knew it would happen to them, menopause would
Mhm.
happen to them. 33 said yes, and 14% said no. So that's a big pot, 50, 67% that kind of or did not know
Mhm.
menopause was going to happen to them. So that's quite a big shock to the system. And I think one of the things when you work with people is you work holistically on the person, not just a stubborn hot flush, for example, isn't it? And that shock and that surprise definitely comes into someone's survivorship, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, that's a huge part really of the work that I do. I sort of see my job is as, not only supporting women who've been plunged into an unnatural menopause very quickly, so their bodies haven't had time to adjust, but also dealing with all of the stress and shock and the aftermath of the treatment as well. So that nervous system and that adrenal support is such an important part of the holistic process, absolutely.
Mm. So, how can herbal medicine help if you've had a cancer diagnosis and you're struggling with lots of symptoms? And I'd quite like to know from people at home what their most problematic symptoms are at the moment. So, feel free to use the chat and I can read them out. How does it help?
Yeah, that would be really useful. So there's so many ways that herbal medicine can help. And also when we're talking about herbal medicine, it's worth just mentioning that herbal medicine comes in many different forms. So you've got capsules, you've got liquid herbs, which are also called tinctures. You might have herbal creams, which can be really helpful after radiotherapy. There's tablets, there's all sorts of different ways. There's teas, we all love drinking herbal teas, and they can be really effective as well. So there's all these different forms of herbal medicine. So again, that can be a little bit confusing. What form should I take the herbal medicine in? So we'll talk a bit more about that as well. But the ways that it can help is really improving your quality of life after you've had a cancer diagnosis. And we know that studies show that mood disorders and depression can really contribute to reduced survival rates. That's just a fact, and it goes back to this kind of mind-body connection that we have sort of lost touch with over the years. And it's also really important to say that if you're feeling really left out, that you can't take HRT, or perhaps you were taking HRT before your diagnosis and you've had to stop taking it, and you might be feeling a bit upset about that. It's worth just remembering that only 20% of women, of menopausal women in the UK, actually take HRT. And that might sound like a really surprising statistic because it feels like everyone's on HRT and you might feel like you're missing out. But just rest assured that that's really not the case. And there's so much we can do to help you feel better without HRT. So, help you feel better, boost your mood, mitigate the side effects of any drugs that you might be taking to suppress your cancer, and just generally work on all aspects of your well-being. So that might be sleep, which can really be a big problem, when you're taking aromatase inhibitors, for example. And gut health can really take a hit when you've been through chemotherapy. So there's so much we can do with herbal medicine to really get you back on your feet.
Mm. So a few people, Sinead said,
Mhm.
Magdalena said she's sweating like crazy and she has sleep problems.
Mhm.
Hot flushes and brain
Mhm.
fog,
Mhm.
those are things people want help with. More
Mhm.
hot flushes and really stiff and achy joints.
Mhm.
And for someone else, their worst symptoms are hot flushes, histamine intolerance, and sleep again. So it
Mhm.
seems to be a hot flush and sleep night today. Um, For Elaine, also, it is sleep and mood. For Emma, it's irritability, feeling cold all the time,
Mm,
and more hot flushes, more brain fog and memory. And someone did say, yes, I have got gut issues. I'm on tamoxifen, for example.
yeah.
So it seems to be very classic menopausal symptoms today of the hot flushes, the low mood, and the poor sleep. Would herbal medicine be able to support and assist?
Absolutely. And I think a really good place to start is with a category of herbs that we call adaptogens. And you've probably heard of these herbs, because everyone talks about adaptogens, but that's actually for a really good reason that they've become so popular. And that's because modern life is so incredibly stressful. And going through a cancer diagnosis is incredibly stressful. So, what we want to start doing is rebuilding your resilience and calming your nervous system and supporting your adrenal system. And so, these plants that are called adaptogens are really, really useful in helping with some aspects of this. So, one that you probably have all heard of is ashwagandha, which is a plant that comes to us from India, from the Ayurvedic tradition. And its name actually translates as smell of a horse.
Mm.
Because it does have a bit of a strong smell, the root of the plant. You wouldn't notice that if you're just getting it as a capsule. But it also gives you the strength and stamina of a horse. So that's why it's really prized in India and why it's become so popular over here, in the West, because we're all really lacking in our resilience, and we need support for our adrenal system and our nervous system. So ashwagandha is really useful if you're struggling with sleep. If you're feeling stressed and anxious, it's a very calming adaptogen, and it's generally safe to use. And I've done a lot of research into potential interactions with things like tamoxifen and letrozole, for example. And so far, I am really confident that it's a good one to take if you're already taking those kinds of medications. So that's a
Mm.
good place to start. And there have also been some interesting studies that have shown that it can help with hot flushes as well. Because what
Mm.
we know about hot flushes is that hot flushes actually work on our neurotransmitter systems. So, when we're intervening with herbal medicines that also work on our neurotransmitters, then it can also calm down the hot flushes as well. So, that's a good
Mm.
one to start with. And a couple of other adaptogens are rhodiola. So, rhodiola again is very strengthening, it's good for mood and energy, but it can increase the liver clearance of some medications. So just be cautious if you're taking medication. But that's another good one to sort of think about. And another favorite one of mine is something called Eleuthero, or Siberian ginseng is its other name. And this is very good for your immune system, good for energy, gives you a real boost, and it's wonderful if you've had radiotherapy, a really good recovery herb from radiotherapy. So that's
Mm.
a good one. You're
I'm
going?
going to put
Yeah,
a an article you wrote for us
yeah.
into the chat. It's on the Menopause and Cancer website, and it's Herbal Medicine for Menopause After Cancer research article. So have a look at home, because Melinda has put research papers into this article. So it's all fully researched for you. So if you maybe want to communicate with your healthcare professional, with your doctor, whether you want to add maybe ashwagandha into your toolkit and you are not quite sure, or you want to speak to your pharmacist, then you can use that and also use some of the research. One thing you've said, Melinda, that I really want to really hone in a little bit is it can change how some other drugs are being metabolized. That
Mm,
already has like alarm bells to me,
mm-hmm,
and maybe
mm-hmm.
for many people that are listening,
Yeah,
thinking, oh, how do I know? How
yeah.
do I know this is safe for me, or after my type of cancer, maybe people are thinking I've had an estrogen positive breast cancer. Is that different to a womb cancer? How do we know whether these things are okay for us?
So I would say, please just don't try and self-medicate because it is really complicated, it is really confusing, and we want you to be safe and we want you to take your medication safely. You know, I trained for 8 years to become a medical herbalist. You know, there is a lot to understand and to know about these herbs and plants that you're taking. And there are some that are really benign and very safe, and I'll get onto a few of those in a minute. But if you have any concerns or any worries, please seek some professional advice. You know, if you've been through a cancer diagnosis, you're already feeling anxious, you're already feeling nervous about anything that might, you know, I call it your force field. You know, you've got your force field
Yes.
around you that's protecting you from any sort of recurrence, and you don't want anything that's going to get inside that force field. So
Mm.
do seek medical advice. Don't try and self-medicate if you're at all worried.
Mm. I don't think it's very easy to come across good medical advice when you want to
Mm,
go outside of the conventional treatment. Like so many people ask about diet, exercise, and we get some answers. Ask any of our oncology nurses or doctors about herbal medication, and you'll probably get a raised eyebrow or a I don't know, or a
yeah,
absolutely no, just
yeah.
because it's easier. And that's okay because not everyone can be trained in everything.
Mm.
Um, so I have two choices. I either go into a shop and I pick out an ashwagandha bottle and I'm thinking, hope for the best, which we don't want to do. Or, but I know a lot of people do, and I have done for years, and I had cupboards full of supplements. Or we go and seek the help of a professional like yourself. How can we find these trained ones, good ones?
So, to find a really good and qualified medical herbalist, look on the National Institute of Medical Herbalists website, and you'll be able to find a herbalist near you. I think Danny's going to put the link up for that as well. Or you can also contact me as well through my website, and I'm always happy to speak to people about any queries that they may have. And also, just to pick up on your point, Danny, about how do we know what we're buying when we go into a shop? You know, this is a really important point to cover, because there is a lot of rubbish out there on the market. And, you know, this really upsets me because people go and waste their money, buy products that don't work, and then they think, oh, well, herbal medicine's a complete load of rubbish and,
Mm.
has no effect, didn't do anything for me, and it goes straight in the bin. And, this is really heartbreaking to me because herbal medicine can be so powerful and effective when you know how to use it properly and when you're getting the right products. And obviously I work with herbal medicines that come from specialist suppliers, so I know exactly what herbs I'm getting and where they're from and what grade they are. But if you're going into a shop, some tips for you are, look at the ingredients list, try to make sure there's not loads of fillers in there. Some really cheap supplements have things like talc in them, which are actually carcinogenic and shouldn't be in supplements. You know, try not to buy the cheapest stuff out there. You sort of like your Boots, your Superdrug kind of low grade, multivitamins and things like that. But on the other hand, you don't want to pay mega bucks. There are some ridiculous supplements out there that cost a fortune, and you want to just be somewhere in the middle. And there are some really good brands, and I'm happy to mention a few of them if you want me to. Maybe we can do that at the end. But just a good tip as well is to look for a logo, which is the THR logo, which means Traditional Herbal Registration. And this means that that product has been through a really rigorous testing process and that you're you're actually getting what you pay for, because a lot
Mm,
of these products and supplements might contain only a tiny amount of the
mm,
herb that they're advertising on the packet. So you've got to
mm,
do your research.
mm. What becomes a little bit easier when we do our own research is when we're very clear about why we want to choose a herb. And I think for many years I wasn't clear. I asked lots of people, what supplements do you take? You're also in early menopause. What do you take? And I kind of like just soaked it all up and did a little bit of what other people did. But I did never really sat down and thought, why do I want to take a supplement? And I hope that little story of mine can be an encouragement to you at home listening now, thinking, why would you consider herbal medication? Is it to try and tackle and aid one of your symptoms, like we've discussed? Or is it because you want to look after your long-term health? Because sometimes that muddles in and people say, oh, I'm worried about my bones and maybe a
Mhm.
supplement would be good, or just, not feeling great. And then it's probably quite hard to find a supplement. Whereas if you have a real clear, that's the reason, your research might be a little bit easier to make. And so when you are in a shop, then you might know what to look for. Um, there's nothing wrong with buying supplements in shops, right? We just need to know, maybe have a trusted brand or have a couple of trusted brands. And then how quickly would you see a benefit, if there is a benefit? Or do you think that's not as easy to say?
So it very much differs depending on, what you want to treat and what plant you might be using. So, if we go back to this subject of your nervous system and calming down anxiety, you can actually get really quick results with that. If you think about drinking a cup of chamomile tea, okay? If you make it strong enough, and I always recommend using loose leaf chamomile tea rather than tea bags because it will be much stronger. You'll start to feel calmer within 15 minutes of drinking a cup of chamomile tea. So it can be that fast. If you're using a herb like black cohosh, which we can talk about, and you want to get on top of your hot flushes, that's going to take between about 10 days to 14 days to kind of really start to work on the hot flushes. So I'm just giving you two examples there of things
Mm,
where you can get a really quick result with some things, whereas with other things, you need to take them for a while. And certainly with a lot of supplements, it's recommended to take them for at least 3 months before
mm,
you decide to throw them in the bin or not,
mm.
or keep
Yeah,
taking them.
yeah.
You know.
Um, it is interesting, isn't it? Because any cup of coffee or a normal cup of tea, say an English breakfast tea, has caffeine, and that will give us an effect or a little boost. Or people say, I can't have it in the evening, otherwise I can't sleep. And so,
Mm,
of course, other herbal teas can come with other benefits. And I
mm,
always think it's quite striking when people discount the lovely
mm,
benefits herbal teas can have,
mm.
when it's so clear that a breakfast cup of English breakfast cup of tea can give you that morning boost. It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's yeah. Anyway, let's not digress. Let's go and talk about phytoestrogens, because you've just mentioned black cohosh,
Yeah.
and I want to know if black cohosh is part of the phytoestrogen groups, because that's what a lot of people
Mm,
say, or
mm,
what are phytoestrogens, not necessarily in food form, but in supplement form.
mhm,
It's really important we get the guidelines clear, we get
mm.
those right, and the latest evidence, because they don't always sync up, do they?
No, no, absolutely. And okay, so this is sort of a two-part answer. So just first of all, talking about black cohosh. So this is something a lot of you may have heard of. If you haven't heard of it, it's a really famous menopausal herb that originated in North America, and the First Nations people in North America used to use it a lot for things like rheumatism, which is interesting because it's really good for menopausal joint pain, and also for, women's reproductive health. And it's become hugely popular over here now, in Europe, and it's been used very safely in menopause treatment for, it must be nearly 100 years now. And there's loads and loads of studies on it. And for a long time, people thought it was a phytoestrogen. Um, because it had such an amazing effect on hot flushes, and it really was an incredible menopausal herb. So people just assumed that it had an estrogenic effect. But the more research that has come out, the more scientific studies that have been done, we now know that it is not estrogenic and that it actually works on the neurotransmitters, the same neurotransmitters, like serotonin, for example, that impact our hot flushes and the dysregulation we get in our temperature, in our hypothalamus, that cause the hot flushes. And, there's been all sorts of, like the Spanish Menopause Society put out a big statement about this last year or a couple of years ago, saying it is not estrogenic. It is safe for women who have had estrogen sensitive cancer. And in fact, we should be really encouraging women who've had estrogen sensitive cancer to take it because it is so beneficial. Obviously, if you're on medication, then you need to have a bit of a think about that. Letrozole, in my research, you're okay to take black cohosh with letrozole. Tamoxifen is a little bit more of a gray area, but there was such an interesting study that was done back in 2011, just a small study, where they had 50 breast cancer patients on tamoxifen and they were given black cohosh. And 6 months later, their menopause symptoms were all measured and they all reported massive benefits and reduction in symptom severity. So I think it's really encouraging that there are more and more trials being done with women on tamoxifen who are then being given black cohosh. So again, if you're on medication right now, don't rush out and start taking black cohosh. Come and speak to me or speak to a medical herbalist or a doctor who is an integrative specialist, and they'll be able to advise you. But so that's a really important one to kind of debunk that. So if you've had estrogen sensitive cancer and you're not taking any medication, then you're fine. Please do take some black cohosh because it will really help you. And then your second part of your question is about phytoestrogens. And so there's been a lot of controversy about this over the years, loads of sort of conflicting research. On one hand, lots of research telling us how beneficial phytoestrogens are in preventing cancer recurrence. But then on the other hand, lots of concern about, are they going to stimulate our estrogen receptors and, stimulate cancer growth if you've had estrogen sensitive cancer? And so things are changing. And what we know so far is that in terms of food, so eating phytoestrogenic food is very, very beneficial if you've had estrogen sensitive cancer. Things like flaxseed, soy, edamame beans, all of those foods that are phytoestrogenic, and even carrots are phytoestrogenic. Lots of our vegetables are phytoestrogenic. So we're not going to stop eating carrots, are we? Because they are so good for us. So, if you're having phytoestrogens as food, it's all good. The problems start to come when you're, going back to what I was saying earlier about extracting certain chemicals out of a plant and then turning them into very high strength supplements. So you see these isoflavone supplements, which are marketed for menopause. And that's where I think the caution comes in if you've had estrogen sensitive cancer, because these are in huge doses, and that's where you want to just be a bit more cautious. But again, Danny, I know we've talked about this many times before. The research is changing so fast, and we now know that there are two types of estrogen receptors, alpha and beta. And the alpha receptors are usually the ones that drive our cancer forward, and the beta receptors suppress the cancer. And so we're learning more and more that these great phytoestrogenic herbs actually work more on the beta receptors, and that's why they might be helping to suppress cancer. So I think there's a lot of exciting potential with so-called phytoestrogenic herbs. I think the name is quite misleading because it makes you feel worried, if you've had an estrogen sensitive cancer. But so that, yeah, the research is changing rapidly. And I think in the next few years, we might start to all feel much more confident about taking them, as herbal medicine. Because just so you're clear as well, in herbal medicine, we've got red clover, we've got sage, we've got hops, and we've got an Ayurvedic herb called shatavari, and these are all so-called phytoestrogens. So that's just to let you know a
And
few of
it's
them.
so important to have really differentiated conversations for cancer survivors, because when I pick up any sort of normal menopause herbal medicine supplement, they will all contain a variety of ingredients. It's not usually one, is it? It's usually a variety of ingredients. And so people might not always realize what is what. So it might be red clover and black cohosh, and it might be with ashwagandha and maybe magnesium. It might be a lovely evening supplement. And that
Mm,
may be a lovely supportive supplement for a healthy perimenopausal
mm,
or menopausal woman. But unless you really understand which of those ingredients is a phytoestrogen, is this appropriate for me? What is the latest research? It can be really confusing. And I would always say to people, don't get those multi-vitamin packets unless you really understand exactly what is in those. Would you
yeah.
agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like you say, I mean, the work I do with women, it's so individualized, it's so tailored to
Mm.
your specific symptom list and your medical history and your medication, and just picking a supplement off a shelf, like you say, it can be so confusing if there's multiple different aspects to it. I mean, that's why it's often quite good just to start with a single supplement. So just get ashwagandha, for example, rather than all these big mixes of things that you get.
It's funny you say that because that's exactly, I mean, I know, full disclosure, I've worked with Melinda and I was your patient quite a few years ago now, wasn't it? But I've then taken supplements on and off, and I've now edged forward to a double supplement. So it's now magnesium with an ashwagandha mixed in. And I quite like taking that in the evening. It's part of my evening ritual. I know exactly what's in it. And so I know what you mean. It always felt safe to take a single supplement and see how you go. So that's a
Yeah.
really good advice. In terms of the research around phytoestrogens for
Mm,
cancer survivors, it's also really positive, isn't it? There is big research is it in Australia or the US with
mm.
by Professor Roberta Brinton. You explained to
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
you? And it actually shows that it could be beneficial in terms of cancer survivorship as well and recurrence rate. So these aren't just supplements as such or herbal medication to take to manage hot flushes. The research is also looking into how it can improve cancer survivor rates, which is
Hmm.
exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and that's going to be really exciting. So that's at the University of Arizona, and they've got, grants of millions and millions of dollars to really look at specific phytoestrogenic constituents
Mm.
and to develop what they're calling a non-hormonal menopause supplement, which is also going to
Mm.
be very good for your brain as well.
Mm.
You know, and
Amazing.
and I think that would be really beneficial because it's really tricky with things like hot flushes because they just released a new drug, Vizoa, and unfortunately, in the last couple of months, it's really had a big warning put on it for adverse liver reactions. So, women are really wanting a non-hormonal hot flush, you know, um, drug or supplement that's going to help them, so
Absolutely.
yeah, there's a big demand.
Someone just popped into the comments and they said, going back a couple of questions, ashwagandha was suggested for her 2 years ago by an Ayurvedic practitioner,
Mm,
but the hospital pharmacists said basically they don't know or they don't have enough evidence. So they advised me not to take it and they kind of scared her. Um, and so she says only recently did she realize it might have been okay for her and it would have been so useful for her, as she also got long COVID and such a shame, but it's
Mm,
good to know. And I think sometimes we go to places for advice like hospital
mm,
pharmacies or our local GP, and it is normal for people not to know these answers, right? All you do is study these herbs and look at the latest research and look at contraindications. Of course, you're going to know more than a pharmacist who is dishing out so many drugs on a daily basis at such a large spectrum.
yeah, and
Um,
also quite often they're simply putting it into a database and getting
mhm,
some answers spat out at them. And sometimes that research is not, up to date. It might be a little bit, out of date, the research they're looking at. So, yeah, I mean, which is obviously not to discredit their professionalism,
mm.
but it is good. I mean, yeah, it's just good to kind of really dig into the research if you're interested.
Mm. What are your favorite herbs to aid with sleep? We did a sleep webinar with a fantastic doctor, and she was explaining that actually good sleep doesn't start in the evening, it starts in the morning. And as soon
Mm.
as you wake up and you get that sleep rhythm going, really, by just waking up and looking outside your window, what herbs would you add, and at what time in the day would you add them to aid
Mm.
sleep?
So there's a couple of really great, tried and tested, wonderful herbs for sleep. So one is passion flower and one is valerian. And you see valerian tea. It's often valerian and passion flower often get combined together in, nighttime sort of supplements. And they're really calming, really helpful, really help you get off to sleep. So they can be really beneficial. And there's also one of my favorite herbs, which is called skullcap, which is a very scary name, but it's actually a really lovely calming herb. So if you're suffering from anxiety before you go to sleep, because often if you get stuck in that loop of insomnia, bedtime can become incredibly stressful because you're just immediately thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have another bad night's sleep, and you feel really stressed when you go to bed, you don't feel calm. So skullcap can be really useful in just calming things down. And of course, your good old chamomile as well.
Mhm. And if we wanted to take that to aid our sleep, for example,
Mhm.
would you just take it before you go to bed? And would a tea be better over a tablet or a tincture? Is there preferences?
Yeah, so chamomile tea is always a lovely one, and often you get valerian tea that you can have before bed, and even just drinking that, lots of people find beneficial. I give capsules of valerian to a lot of my patients. Sometimes I'll give them a liquid mix of things like passion flower, valerian, and skullcap all mixed together for them. So, you can choose whatever you feel is right for you there.
Thank you so much. Um, Are there any contraindications to chamomile? I feel like I've grown up on chamomile tea, and my nan would go and pick little chamomile flowers and she would dry them on parchment paper, and then we would add them in tea. And it was a beautiful sort of ritual. And it started in the summer, and then we'd have chamomile tea. And it seemed the most innocent thing to do. But actually, chamomile is powerful and potent, isn't it?
Really powerful. And it's also really good for your gut health. I know we mentioned that earlier. So if you've got any gut upsets, it's very anti-inflammatory as well, and really healing for the gut. But yeah, there are interactions with drugs with chamomile. And again, this goes back to its actions on the liver and how it might potentially clear some drugs out of your system perhaps a bit faster than you might wish them to clear. So again, just always check if you're on medication with things like that. Yeah, chamomile is a surprising one on that front.
Thank you so much. Do you have a favorite one herb, or is your answer going to be there is no such a thing? Do you think something like black cohosh has been, like you explained earlier, such a transformative herb for so many people? Or do you think, as someone like you, think there is no such a thing as one silver bullet
Yeah,
that
exactly.
we could all come on? What's the silver
Exactly.
bullet?
If I had a pound for every time someone asked me, what's the one thing I can take for
Yes.
menopause, I would be very rich. And because it is so individual, we all have our own individual experiences of menopause. And especially when you've been through a cancer diagnosis, it's so individualized. I mean, black cohosh is a really good all-rounder because it does help with things like anxiety, night sweats, hot flushes, joint pains. So it's a good menopause all-rounder. But ashwagandha, I would say, is in most of the herbal medicine formulations that I make for my patients. And I think that's just because, not only you've been through a cancer diagnosis, but you live in 2025. It's very stressful for all of us, and especially as a midlife woman, there's so many stresses on all of us. So yeah, that's a gold one from me.
Now I'm going to stop the recording here. The conversation on the workshop did go on for a long time more, and lots of people asked their questions, but a lot of the questions to Melinda were really specific to their individual case. And so I decided not to air this part of the workshop and the conversation. But if you do also want to have access to sit in some of these workshops alongside and ask your questions to our experts, then reach out to us. Have a look on menopauseandcancer.org. You can find all of our services. And you can also find the listings of where we have all of these live workshops and how you can sign up for them. They're free to attend. So do that if you want to join us the next time. In the show notes, I'm going to link to all of the resources that Melinda mentions throughout this conversation. I'm also going to link to Melinda and to our resources. And can I please ask you, if you're still here, if you're still listening, please review and rate this podcast conversation. We don't have money for advertising. We don't have budget. And if you leave a review and you say how the podcast has helped you, it will help others understand that some of these conversations might be transformative and life-changing for them as well. So leave a review and whatever podcast app you're listening to this, and we'd be very grateful, and you can pay the favor forward so that others can also find the show. I can't wait to chat to you on next week's podcast episode. And I really hope that you've got a good week, that you're not facing too many hurdles this week, and that our conversations are a little bit useful for you and your journey of recovery and healing from cancer.